And welcome back to part 2 of Acid and Chaos, and actually this makes part 8 of migration in general. And last time we left off, we were talking about strange things that happen when you're under the influence of a psychedelic. And by that I mean paranormal connections that seem to be going on, specifically when you're on a hallucinogen, like you are thinking about somebody and suddenly that person just shows up out of nowhere, or they call or text you, or you're thinking of a specific song and all of a sudden that song just comes on. Most veteran users are very aware of what I'm talking about, and there's a lot of different examples, where people just suddenly start talking about exactly what you've had on your mind, things like that, and all kinds of deeper connections. So we're going to dive into that a little bit deeper today. So all we really had time to discuss last time about that phenomenon is that the idea that, well, these things are happening all the time is what I told you. And it just happens that when you're on a psychoactive, you happen to have more of your attention focused to the present. So you're more aware of these things. But that's not the entire story. In fact, that topic is far more complex than that, but we just didn't have time to get into it last time. The reality is that there is an argument that says that no, in fact, strange things may indeed begin to occur simply because you are paying attention to them. So as just one example of millions of examples out there, I myself, I've personally seen a couple of UFOs in my life. And yes, when both of those experiences occurred, I was under the influence of marijuana. Light doses, mind you, these were not the kind of elevated doses where, yes, cannabis can indeed become somewhat psychoactive. We're talking mild doses, and I am very familiar with my hallucinogens, and this was not a hallucination. Hallucinations occur in very specific ways. They come about in very reliable ways when you're under the influence of a psychoactive. That is absolutely not what I saw. However, did I see that UFO, or both of those UFOs, simply because I was high and I happened to be, paying more attention to the sky, my head was in the clouds, so to speak? Or is it possible that literally those UFOs only became observable once I was under the influence of a psychoactive? So when we start asking these types of questions, we kind of fall into a Schrodinger's cat type of scenario where, we're not really sure what's exactly going on. Which is it? Is it simply a matter that strange things, weird connections are always happening around us all the time, and we just happen to be more aware of them when we're in certain states of consciousness, like under the influence of a psychedelic? Or when we step outside of our tidy little narrative that keeps our world in check, and we actually bring our attention to that larger realm beyond, is it possible that under those circumstances that weird things actually do happen? So that's what we're going to discuss today. That's what we're diving into today. With over 30 years of first-hand experience with lucid dreaming, radical healing, astral projection, and paranormal states of consciousness, I've come to develop a unified theory about the mechanics behind all of these fantastic powers, which everyone has access to. I've learned that our consciousness is not a localized phenomenon. It only appears to be an isolated point of awareness living somewhere behind our eyes, because we've latched onto stories that have convinced us this is the case since we were born into this world. It is our very attachment to these narratives that appears to bind us to the cage of the physical mind and body. Through this series, we're embarking on an adventure to explore this relationship we carry with storylines and symbolism, so that we can, once and for all, dispel this faulty notion that our awareness, our true identity, has ever been limited and localized within the brain. I am not speaking of a supernatural gift that only the holy or the gifted can tap into. In fact, I'm personally an atheist. I'm referring to a perfectly natural phenomenon that most people won't realize until their physical body passes away. But why wait, when you can take advantage of your incredible potential now? Welcome to a journey to a brand new landscape. Welcome to migration. And that brings us to the topic of quantum physics. There is one interpretation in quantum physics where they say that our reality operates in such a way that things can only pop up into existence when we actually observe them, that it is our actual consciousness, there's something about our attention to reality that makes it pop out from a wide universe of possibilities.
The observer effect is the most fundamental concept when it comes to contemporary quantum theory. The quantum theory implies that there is no phenomenon until it is observed. This means that before anything can happen, it has to be measured or observed first. The observer effect is an extension to this theory. It is actually the changes that occur due to something being observed.
Quantum physicists will often speak of reality in terms of it existing in what they call probability waves. And a probability wave is a reality where particles, where all of our reality, down to the particle level, exists in every possible reality that it can at the same time. But of course, that's not the universe we observe. We don't experience a world where everything is existing in every possible state at the same time. That's not the way reality works for us. So what they say, what physicists will say is that once we observe a particle, all of those many possibilities that it lives in collapses down to one reality. So at that point, then the particle that appeared in many states before we observed it is then only in one state. It is in one specific spot in time and space. And you are welcome to dig into these experiments for yourself. This is not just theoretical of what I'm talking about. This is a real phenomenon that we call wave collapse. Theoretical physicist Brian Greene does some wonderful videos. I'll leave some links on the video below there to his videos where he describes this wave collapse through what they called a double slit experiment. So check those out. So please understand that the majority of physicists out there would not be happy about the connections that I'm making between what is going on at the particle level and what is going on with us at what we call the macro level. But in fairness, physicists also don't understand exactly how those two worlds relate to each other exactly. That is actually a giant gap in physics right now. They're trying to understand exactly how those two worlds connect exactly. So we are absolutely sure that at the particle level, things behave in a very spooky way, just like I've been describing, that once we bring our consciousness and our attention to something, all the many possibilities that can exist seem to collapse down to just one possibility for us once we bring our attention to it. So with all of this in mind, let's put this all together. When we are in a psychoactive state, or even just a meditative state, what is happening is that we are moving our attention away from that neat and tidy world that our narrative keeps in a very tight, very streamlined perspective. And once our attention moves outside of that habitual, ordinary world that we are used to seeing day in and day out, once our attention moves beyond that, we are able to possibly bring about strange events for the simple fact that now our attention has moved beyond our normal everyday life, our habitual state of experiencing reality. So it is possible that from this perspective that we are literally bringing about weird things to happen. They are literally manifesting around us because we are bringing our attention to them. And of course, my argument is that what shamans and gurus and philosophers and monks have been telling us for, since recorded history is just that. They've been saying that our consciousness, our attention, is not just a passive phenomenon. It's a very active one. It's a phenomenon that acts on the world as well. And again, this is not just all theoretical. We have evidence of this all around us in our daily world. Back in part 4 of this series, we were talking about things like what the placebo effect can do to us and what can happen with people who are suffering from multiple personality disorders, how a specific narrative, how attention to a specific narrative can literally, not metaphorically, can literally shape-shift a body from that of a diabetic to a completely healthy person. In one specific example, we have evidence of this where people who simply move their attention from one story to another story can literally make changes within their body. And it's the exact same thing that we're seeing happening with a placebo effect. When someone tells you that a specific drug will have a specific effect, it is incredible the effects that can take place in that. If you want the full discussion on that, again, go back to part 4 and take a look at just how powerful our ability to manifest things for ourselves can be. So this is, again, this is not just theoretical. We have proof of this all around us if we really just pay attention. Okay, so if this is actually true, if we can truly go into the right frame of consciousness and we can choose to direct our awareness to wherever we want and therefore manifest reality as we so choose, how far can humans take that principle? How far can that really go? And what does that really look like in a shared world where, suppose everybody had the ability to just, manifest reality as they so choose? What does that really look like in a world? Is that even possible? And those of you who read my first book, Tripping the Field, you know that that was the entire point of that book in many respects. We were just exploring what that principle really looks like when you play it out to its furthest extent. And of course, the whole point of this series is that I am trying to hand everybody the tools so that you can answer that question for yourself. I want you to have all of the necessary resources at your disposal so that you can go and investigate how far can you take these principles. You know some of the stories that I've told you about what I know is personally possible when we're talking about not just lucid dreaming, but astral projection and spontaneous healing, telepathy. We're going to get into telekinesis later down the road. We're going to investigate some people who focus just on that. But what I want you to be able to do is answer that question for yourself. But in the meantime, this is one answer that I would like you to really consider, and that is, this is how far you can take that principle. You can take that principle far enough to make your life content, perfectly content. You can use those principles of using your consciousness to manifest what it is that you want or you need around you to make you perfectly at peace and content with your life. And that right there is perhaps the biggest truth that I have discovered on this journey to understanding what the true nature of consciousness, my connection to narratives, and what my place in this world is really about. That somewhere along your journey, if you are trying to attain power, if you are trying to attain some sort of, magical gift that's going to bring you everything that you want, power, money, fame, riches, whatever that may be, if you are truly dedicated to the right path, the one of them that I've been describing, but of course there are many other ways to describe this path, somewhere along the line, you will find contentment before you find access to that complete power. And it's sort of a weird catch-22 that seems to be built into our universe, that you find peace with yourself before you attain all of those riches that you've been chasing after. And it's a strange phenomenon for sure, and it's certainly hard to negotiate because what happens is that you change. You are no longer the small, scared, powerless person who is so much desiring riches and power and control, really. You are not that person anymore as you move along your journey. So at some point, you just become more peaceful and you don't as much care about what powers you can achieve. So, yeah, enlightenment is certainly a very strange beast just for that reason. There's this weird thing where if you are trying to align yourself with the truth, if you are truly serious about this, the more that you align yourself with these realities, yes, the more power that you're going to start finding that you have access to. You have access to very strange abilities, all of the abilities that have been discussed in all of the religious books and the spiritual books that have been written since the beginning of time. All of those are attainable. But like I'm saying, if you are truly dedicated to the right path and you are really dedicated to finding out who you are and what your true source of your own power is, the more power that you have access to, the more content you're going to become and the less interested you're going to become in using any of it or really chasing after any of it. And if this specific discussion in attaining mystical powers really fascinates you, I would definitely I would suggest that you go check out my first book, Tripping the Field. It is fiction. It is a wild adventure ride through shamanism and religion and shape-shifting and mystical powers in general. But the shaman in that book refer to this catch-22 that we're talking about as a built-in fail-safe of the universe, that power is only handed to those who don't desire to wield it. And it's a strange thing. Of course, in the book, the antagonists are villains of the story. They find a loophole to that so that they still have access to the power, and yet they still very much desire to use it. So it plays out in a very strange way. But if you are truly dedicated to this path, you're going to find the same thing, that you're going to start understanding how all of this starts to make sense. Lucid dreaming starts to truly make sense. The idea that our consciousness is not localized in a specific spot at one time and place, that really will start to click for you. Telepathy is not going to seem such a strange thing anymore. The idea of spontaneous healing yourself or even healing others, it's no longer going to seem really all that weird anymore. It's going to start making more sense because you're going to start seeing what's at the core behind all of these phenomena. And that, again, it is your consciousness. The more control you have of your consciousness, the more it is not on a leash from all of those, controlled by all of your narratives, the more power you are certainly going to attain. But again, once you are on that path, you're going to find yourself becoming more and more at peace with everything. You're not going to be so egomaniacal chasing after all of these, the riches and the fame and the power anymore. Okay, so I think this is a good place to end part 2 for now. I do believe that at this point, this is going to have to be a trilogy, Acid and Chaos. We're going to have to do 3 of these because there are still some other topics that I want to get into, that we need to talk about how psychoactives play a larger role in these states of consciousness that we've been talking about. So there's going to be another part after this, and we need to talk about other things. Like we need to talk about the idea of the bad trip. You always hear about that in the realm of hallucinogens, that some people have a bad trip, and we want to talk about exactly what bad trips are, how those come about, and we also need to talk about set and setting. It took me years to understand that where and how I was taking psychoactives was so incredibly important, and what I know now, I wish I would have learned earlier on, but that's the way these journeys work, that you don't always figure this out for sometimes years and years later. So we need to talk about the best way to go into these states and how to make the most of these trips if if I am suggesting that you can indeed attain very strange mystical states of consciousness and truly bring about odd connections into your life when you're in these states, we need to talk about what is the best thing that you can be doing for yourself. If you are, if you're taking mushrooms one day, if you've got some LSD and you want to make the most of it, and you want to know how can I use the power that I have to get into these altered states of consciousness that we're talking about. So there's a lot still to discuss on this topic. So we will return for part 3, hopefully next week. So again, all of you who have been following this, I very much appreciate all of your support. Thank you for everybody who's been watching, reading my books, sending me notes. I've gotten some great feedback from some of you and some great questions as well. Again, this channel right now, it's still very new, and so I'm able to get to just about everyone who has a legitimate question about what it is I've been talking about. So ask away. I will do what I can. It may take me some time to get to you, but I will try to answer your questions if you are serious. If I find that if I believe that you have a legitimate question about what's going on, you've really been paying attention. So until next time, thanks so much for watching.